Hello, hello, and welcome everyone to our discussion. As we come in the room and get settled, I just want to say again, thank you to our speakers this morning who have been amazing and provided us such rich information, certainly with Meredith around policy and Angela with getting us all ready for our cyber hygiene. I want to thank again both Ann Sullivan and Elizabeth Sullivan, who are joining me for this great discussion as well. And as we come in the room, I just want to remind everyone that advocacy is WIPP's foundation. And we have been successful because we truly do have friends in Congress on both sides of the aisle who are really committed to the small business community. Because of these relationships, we have been able to have a very positive and sustainable impact through policy. Part of the success is due to our relationships with women policymakers that make it easy for us to discuss today and give you some more information. There is really strong evidence that as more women are elected to office, there is a corollary increase in policy making that emphasizes quality of life and reflects the priorities of families, women, and business. Women's participation in politics helps to advance gender equality and affects both the range of policy that gets considered and the types of solutions that are being proposed. So there is no denying it. The positive impact of women in politics is undeniable. With a little over 30 days left until election, we want to dispel some myths for you around the election process and provide you with some education and tools to have you to be ready to make impact through the political process. Now, there is great intersectionality, right, between policy and business, and as women business owners, we must understand the process. I want to remind everyone that there are 435 seats up for election in the House, 33 seats up for election in the Senate, and this really equates to a lot of opportunity, right, for more women policymakers to get involved. Now, with that foundation, I want to jump right in, and we're going to continue to lay a little bit of foundation around the Electoral College. So we know that the popular vote and the Electoral College both exist. As in the last election and previously in elections, we also know the popular vote doesn't necessarily elect the president. So I'd like for us to discuss what the significance is of the Electoral College. Lizzie? I'll turn it over to you.
Maybe I'll take this one until she can get organized.
All right.
Sorry, I just got hung up on. Go ahead, Ann.
Okay, so thank you, Candace, for hosting this. Listen, the Electoral College is the second thing that candidates have to pay attention to in order to get elected. While the popular vote is one element, the Electoral College is the other. And it was set up originally by the founders of our Constitution to be a counter, so to speak, to the popular vote. It's always been with us. It's at the very foundation of our system. And there have been 5 presidents that did not win the popular vote, but won the electoral vote. And I'll just explain a little bit more about that. The electoral vote allows each state to have the votes of its delegation. So if you have, every state has 2 senators, okay? But depending on its population, every state has very different numbers of House of Representatives. And so it's the total amount of your Senate plus House Representatives that makes up what your state total of electoral votes is. So that means that the outcome is not necessarily the same as the popular vote. For example, everybody in Rhode Island could vote for one candidate, right? Every single person could support one candidate, but that wouldn't make a difference. Rhode Island only has the amount of votes that its delegation has, and I think it's only 3 or 4, right? So only 3 or 4 count. So it really puts the onus on the states, and it actually was states' rights was really why it was put in place in the first place. It's interesting to note that the last 2 presidents have not won the popular vote, did not win the popular vote, but won the electoral vote, and that's George W. Bush and Donald Trump. There were only 3 other presidents in history that also were elected by the Electoral College, but not the popular vote. That was John Quincy Adams, Rutherford Hayes, and Benjamin Harrison. So there have been 5, and interestingly, 2 of them were the last 2. So it is something that everybody has to pay attention to. And I would say there is a real movement in this country to think about revamping that system. Perhaps it's no longer as relevant as it was back when our country was founded.
Absolutely. And, really I think the founding fathers were trying to balance high population and low population states, but obviously now in 2020, that looks very different. Just a couple more things on the Electoral College since we're talking about them, and I know that it's going to be something that continues to be talked about over the next 5 weeks is, of the 538 electors, as Ann said, 270 are required to win. That's a number we're going to repeat a lot of times because it can help you kind of figure out the math of why certain campaigns are going to certain states and spending more time there. The District of Columbia, which I actually live in, is also allocated 3 electors, and they are treated like a state for this purpose. The other thing is kind of we've been asked is how are the electors chosen and what are their qualifications? So each candidate that's running for president has their own group of electors. They're generally chosen by the candidate's political party. We kind of talked about this in another session before, but state laws kind of vary on how electors are selected and what their responsibilities are. And during the general election, which, as everyone knows, is held every 4 years on the first Tuesday after November, when you vote for the candidate, you're actually voting for all of your candidate's preferred electors. And most states, as you can see on the map, have a winner-take-all system that awards all electors to the presidential candidate that wins the state popular vote. However, Maine and Nebraska each have a variation of proportional representation, so just keep that in mind.
Yeah, I think it's super important too, right, Lizzie, to just say what happens after the general election, right? Or, that we understand what the Electoral College is, right? And explains like why candidates don't necessarily win every state. So I think that we should talk about, right, states that are to be considered from a presidential play perspective, and then what happens, post-election, if you will.
Absolutely. So if you could go on to the next slide. What we have here is a chart that tells you the Cook Political Report, which is really seen as one of the last kind of nonpartisan kind of polling predictors. They take polls from the most conservative to the largest to a small poll to a really large national poll and put those together based on history, also to come up with their predictions on what states they think are going to lean Democrat, lean Republican, and what states are really in the toss-up. So as you said, you can see here that there are 4 states that are in their toss-up category, which means it could go either way, which consists of 61 electoral votes. And those are Arizona, Georgia, Maine's 2nd Congressional District, as we talked about, that has proportional representation, and also North Carolina. And, if you do the math for 270 to win, you can see the combination of states of, what each candidate could have to then get to that number.
Absolutely. And we know, right, that right now there is a record 127 women, who serve in Congress, right? 106 are Democrats, 21 are Republicans. We know that right now, also, as of this date, there have been in the Senate, in particular, 57 who have served, but currently 26 who are serving. And then of that, 101 are also serving in the US House of Representatives. And so can we talk about this like current women in the 116th Congress? And as you can see, I know that we're going to look at the slide that, we've got two things that are going on, and it's not evenly distributed, right? So why is that? And then secondly, what role have women senators played in WIPP's success? Clearly I understand, but let's make that apparently clear for our attendees today so that they, connect the dots again between business and policy.
Absolutely. If you all could go to the next slide, we're going to pull up and talk about the U.S. Senate. And so as Candace said, what we want to know is in this 116th Congress, which as a reminder, they run for 2 years, there are 26 women senators. And of those 26, there are 4 women of color. Those are Senator Kamala Harris, who is also running as vice president, Senator Catherine Cortez Masto, Senator Tammy Duckworth, and Senator Mazie Hirono. 2 of those 4 are actually on the Senate Small Business Committee, which is not a surprise. It's something that women really prioritize and care about. If you go one more slide for me, that would be great. Also on this side, there you go. You can see, as Candace said, there are 17 Democrats and 9 Republicans. This also includes, and feel free to chime in, this also includes the number of women who are still in the running, who have filed to date for the Senate seats, and that's actually 27. So there's 27 women candidates still running, which is more than the 26 women that currently hold office in the U.S. Senate, which is also a record high. So we're really excited to see that.
Well, I think the reason there's an imbalance in the, that the Democrats have more women than Republicans do, especially in the Senate, is that I think it just reflects better recruiting, right? The Democrats made, I think, over the years, from what I could see, a much bigger effort to try to build the women pipeline. And it also has to go with, people don't generally just run for the US Senate. They were in their state houses. They were, they held other offices. And I think that, again, I just think the Democrats did a better job of recruiting women much earlier than Republicans. This election, by the way, shows that there are more Republican women running now, and not necessarily for the Senate, but just in general. So maybe the Republican pipeline is starting to look a little better than it did in the last 10 years. I also wanted to address why women are key to WIPP successes. Early on in WIPP's history, we tackled getting the Women Small Business Program, set-aside program in place. It took a Herculean effort to implement it because, frankly, the White House at the time didn't want it. Everybody said it was going to get thrown out in court. I mean, there was just so much opposition. And the last thing they always said, those that opposed it, were, well, women are the majority of this country. Why the heck do you need a set-aside program in the federal procurement space when you're the majority? So there were a lot of people who just didn't believe we needed it. And who came to the rescue? It was the women in Congress. I mean, we organized, for example, a letter that every woman member of the Senate sent to SBA telling them to implement the program. And most of the House of Representatives. I mean, it was an undertaking, but it was the women that rose to the occasion, said, we've got to help the women business owners with federal procurement. At the time, it was I think when I started working on it, 2.7% of all federal contracts. And now we're at 5.1. That's like double, right? Or close to double. And so it worked, but I'm just saying that our go-to on a regular basis is the women in Congress. They're really responsive to what we need.
Absolutely.
Candace, I think you're muted.
I'm so sorry about that. I was going to say, I think, as far back as the Reagan presidency, there's been this gender gap in American politics, but it's changing now, right? To your point, Ann, what you talked about, more women in politics, not necessarily in the Senate or the House, but just in the political process and pipeline. And so as we think about, right, the women who are running for Senate in 2020, can we talk a little bit about the women senators that are up this cycle?
Absolutely. And I want to note off of that too, as you just heard from Meredith, I mean, she is the staff director. She's at the highest position in the Senate Small Business Committee for the majority, which is Republicans. But the women that we work with in Congress, they're really, they have women staff as well. So what's really refreshing is to kind of have both the staff and the members and just real advocates in Congress. And by the way, if you're looking for more information on all of the women running that we're talking about, these graphics that we're going to have are from the Center for American Women and Politics, CAWP, and that's at Rutgers. And they are always keeping tabs and have really reliable information on different candidates. So I'd encourage you to go check that out. So there are actually 27 women, like we talked about, running. What's not on this slide are the 15 women that are running as challengers in 10 different states. But this shows you where there are more Republican women actually who are incumbents, who are in Congress running in 8 states this cycle, as opposed to women running for open seats. Something else that's interesting to note is there's been a large uptick of women who are running against women challengers. So for example, in Iowa, Joni Ernst is also running against a woman, same with Maine, West Virginia, and Wyoming. And this, we saw this in 2018, kind of this women versus women uptick, but it's just really refreshing to see women coming to run for these seats on both sides of the aisle. And so again, I would encourage you, if you're in one of these states, to take a look at both the women that are running, since we're always encouraging you to, go and support women candidates.
I also want to just call out 2 senators on this list who have been particularly helpful to WIPP. One is Joni Ernst. She passed a bill for us on category management and trying to figure out are women participating or not, in those contracts. And then second of all, Jean Shaheen was the chair of the committee for a while. She's been the ranking member of the Small Business Committee. She's also in armed services. So it's due to her efforts that we've gotten things into the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. I mean, she has really been instrumental in championing our issues.
Absolutely. I agree with you more, Ann. And I think that that call out really speaks to who WIPP is, right? We are a national nonpartisan organization who works in a bipartisan manner. And so you can see Joni Ernst is on the Republican side, Jean Shaheen is on the Democratic side, but these are friends of WIPP who care about the women-owned small business community. And that is why it's so important for us to work with our policymakers on both sides of the aisle so we can move the needle forward together and make really sustainable change and impact through policy. So as I said, right, we're 5 weeks from the election now, well, a little under 5 weeks. And so at this point, in time, what does the Senate look like, right? Especially in terms of control and such, like what's the environment?
Yeah, so this again is from the Cook Political Report, and these are their categories of what the Senate races that are up. what they think they're going to turn out to be, from solid Democratic, which most people won't pay attention to the more lean Democrat, lean Republican, toss-up, lean R, solid R. So there's kind of a whole range here, as you can see. The ones that, it's important to pay attention to are the toss-up seats. And again, this is as of last week. This might have changed as of today. They're all updating their ratings. But the toss-up seats are Georgia, Iowa, Maine, Montana, and North Carolina. And then also the lean Democratic ones to look at are in Arizona and Colorado. Those are 2 seats currently held by Republicans that they're thinking might flip. And then on the lean Republican side, Doug Jones from Alabama, he's a Democrat that was elected last cycle, and it's looking like that seat might turn Republican. But right now, the Republicans control the Senate, and it's looking like from these kind of toss-ups that there could be a shift to the Democrats being in the majority.
So just to remind everybody, to get control of the Senate, for Democrats to get control of the Senate, they need a gain of 4 seats or 3 seats if Joe Biden wins the presidency. Because why is that? Because the vice president is the tiebreaker. So in an evenly split Senate. So safe is 4 seats, net gain of 4 seats. With the Democratic presidency, it would be 3 seats. That, by the way, is much harder to achieve than you think it is. I mean, the president does carry people with him, but Senate races are really strongly based on how the candidate performed in the last, or not the candidate, but the senator performed in the last 6 years. And so it's much more state-centric than even the House of Representatives, in my opinion, because they've had a longer time in the Senate to prove themselves.
Absolutely. And, you bring that up, and I think it's really important to hone this in, and we're going to hone it at home, during the course of this conversation, is being active and understanding what's going on in your state and being engaged in the political process and really getting to know your policymakers in your state. So, Ann, I definitely appreciate that thought that you just brought up. I want to switch to the House now, right? So, of the 127 women currently serving in Congress, 101 of them are in the U.S. House of Representatives. So can we talk about the women that hold those seats? I mean, that's a great number, and certainly we want it to increase.
Absolutely. So as you said, there are 101. There are currently 88 Democratic women and 13 Republican women. And actually, of that 101, 44 are women of color, which is fantastic. There's also, it's important to note the uptick of women of color in the 2018 election, especially in the House. There was a large wave, and this is breaking many records. And of that 101 women, actually 88 women first entered by winning those general elections. 18 women won special elections, and 58 women lawmakers, as we discussed earlier, held previously elected offices prior to entering Congress. And again, that's on the CAWP website. You can check out all of their bios. But the number of women that have filed to run already, which you can see on this slide, has already outdone the 2018 record. So we're trending in the right direction. There were 583 women candidates that filed to run in 2020 for the U.S. House. And there are 300, as you can see, that are still in the running. So despite, the lost primary, it's 282, there are still more that won their primary and are running. So I can really see kind of the trend in the right directions, but I can also see this year women in the House busting through what was set in 2018.
Absolutely. Ann, did you want to add any comment to that?
Well, I was just thinking, back to when we were talking about the Senate, and I called 2 women out on the list. I actually didn't give it any thought as to whether I was being bipartisan or not. Those were just the two women champions that I chose on the list, just sitting there looking at them. That just is kind of a point about how we work. But second of all, in the House, I just want to do the same thing. I just want to call out a woman who was almost solely responsible for getting us the sole source authority in the WOSB program, and that was Jackie Spear. And she's not even on the Small Business Committee, but she's been a champion of WIPs for a long, long time and a champion of women for a long time. She single-handedly introduced the sole source amendment in the committee that was at that time run by Republicans, and she's a Democrat. So it wasn't even like the leadership of the committee was necessarily interested in pushing it. But she persevered. She worked to get it included in floor amendments, which was just nothing short of a miracle, because again, it was just pretty much her pushing it forward in that setting. And sure enough, we were so surprised. By the way, the Rules Committee at the time, which makes the rules about which amendments can actually end up in the bill, told our president, who was Christy Arslan, hey, can you tell WIP women to stop calling the Rules Committee? We've never, ever had this many calls about and including an amendment. Tell them to stop. We'll put it in. And so that just goes again to, I just wanted to call her out as a particular woman in the House that really helped us. The other one is clearly the chair of the House Small Business Committee, and that's Nydia Velazquez. And to Lizzie's point earlier, you know, her chief is a woman. I mean, women employ women and put them in significant spots. And so, and she championed everything and has championed all of our things, all of our requests for a very long time. And so we're very appreciative of her efforts.
Absolutely. I think also it's worth noting two things. So first of all, Jackie Spear, her Herculean effort, right? We have to continue to say thank you to her for that, as you called out, with really making a difference and an impact that we're still realizing right now. I think it's also appropriate to give a great shout out to the men who support us as well. That's evidenced yesterday with Representative Steve Shabbat, and you know, him being here with us, and it's so important to him to be engaged with us. He's been an amazing supporter as well. And so I just really appreciate the fact that we do work in such a bipartisan manner. Some people say that they do, but I know that we actually do it, you know?
And exactly. And I think it's, as you said, as you just called Steve Shabbat out, it's important to note again that WIPP has worked really hard to also foster, you know, relationships between the members on the committees in the small business committees to work bipartisanly. You heard Meredith say it before this in the Senate, where Senator Cardin, who's ranking member, and Senator Rubio really have tried to work extremely bipartisanly, as well as their staffs, on issues that affect small businesses where they might have some disagreements. You know, there's a general consensus of we need to make sure we can get this done to help women-owned small businesses. And the same in the House. If you ever watch a House Small Business Committee hearing, you'll see Steve Shabbat says every single time, without fail, well, I just love this committee because we do bipartisan work, and thank you, Nydia, because they have also flipped. At one point, he was the chair, she was ranking when the control was different, and then they flipped. So they've kind of gone back and forth. And again, their teams work just seamlessly together, especially in the procurement space. I'm very happy to report that those staffers are all women, so it's not surprising that they work really well together. But they, you know, really understand the importance of what they're doing, and that you have to put the partisan politics aside or try and figure out what's the common ground in order to help women-owned small businesses and women-owned small business contractors specifically. So it's been a really refreshing space to come back to when sometimes in the general media, you get a lot of that kind of partisan bogged down. In our space, it's very refreshing to work with members on both sides and watch them come together to do what's right for small business. So that's part of what I really love doing this work.
Well, I also want to say that, to Meredith's point in our earlier discussion, she was saying, yes, but we need every member of Congress to understand the importance of small business, right? And so while we know the leadership, a team cannot possibly know all 535 members of Congress. It's impossible, right? So that's where members of an organization come in, because you're there, you're the constituent, you're on the ground. You not only need to educate your members on what's important, but you also have to support them if they did. And I think that's the one place that, if there's something that I wish women business owners would do more of, is support their campaigns if in fact they've been your champions.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I know that as we get further into this discussion, I literally am going to end with how to get engaged, how to stay engaged, and how to move that needle, to your point. And we have to be involved in that process from sort of soup to nuts, right? Also, I think it's super important for us to let them know the places that they have done well. So many times we talk about where they're not doing well. Well, when they've done something really well, right, like a Jackie Spear, like a Joni Ernst, like a, Shaheen, we have to be complimentary and let them know, first of all, thank you for your support. And then, data speaks, right? We talked about this yesterday. Data is worth more than oil and gas. And data means letting our policymakers know the positive impact that they've had on the business community with the particular policies that are in place. So I could not agree with you more. So we talked about the House, right, in terms of the women that are holding offices. But now let's talk about the races themselves, right? Because we broke down the Senate races. And so let's break down the races in the House.
Yeah, so obviously there are a lot more to keep track of. There are 96 incumbent women running, and that's across 33 states. And as you can see, the breakdown is 85 Democrats and 11 Republicans, so more Democrats are up. There are 43 women running for open seats in 21 states. You can see the breakdown there as well. And then there are actually 161 women running as challengers in 40 states. And the reason this is interesting to see the breakdown of 70 Republicans to 91 Democrats is, as we noted before, there are way more Democratic women in the House right now than Republican, almost 8 times. And so this women running as challengers, there are 70 Republican women in 40 states. And I found that number just to be fascinating, and kind of working on both sides of the aisle to get women elected. And also, women, there are 47, as I said, open seats in 2020, and women are running in 32 of these open seat contests, separate from the slide. So I just think this speaks again to organizing on both sides to try and get women in the House.
Well, and if you hear results from polls about why candidates run, why women ran in the first place, the overwhelming answer they give is that they were angry about something and decided to take action. So without being too political, I'm just going to say that I think there was ample room from watching last night's debate. I think there might be a lot more people deciding to run in the next 2 years, because there was plenty to be unhappy about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think being involved in the political process is, in my opinion, one of the best ways to exercise, your voice, right? And to make your voice heard, which is exactly what, WIPP is doing, right? That's why we were formed, is to have a seat at the table. And then it was using that voice at the table. And in our evolution of, 20 years that we're going to hit next year, it is all around understanding the power of that voice that you use while you have that seat at the table. And guess what? We are also if you won't give us a seat at your table, we'll pull up another table and we'll ask you to come sit with us so we can have a conversation, right? Because that's where we are right now and what we need to do to be part of that political process. So we talked about races. Now let's talk about control, right? Just like we did in the Senate. Let's talk about what that control looks like in the House. And I know we have the next slide that will give us an overview of that.
Yes, and again, this is from Cook's political report. Most every source has said they don't see the House flipping control. Currently, it's Democratic controlled, but the numbers just don't work out. As you can see, you need 218 to have the majority, and currently there are about 28 toss-up seats, almost split evenly, Democratic and Republican. But there's also a big wave of Republicans retiring, especially in Texas. I think people call it the Texodus. So those seats are also in play. But unfortunately for Republicans, but fortunately for Democrats, it just doesn't seem like the House is going to flip. So there hasn't been a lot of time spent kind of analyzing what that will look like.
Well, a lot of the toss-up seats are actually representatives that just won 2 years ago. A lot of the folks on that list are brand new representatives and are competing for their first re-election. And so a lot of those toss-ups are new rather than entrenched incumbents.
And Candace, I see too that we had some questions in the chat. I just was yammering away and didn't notice. Do you want me to read one of those? I see we had one from Sharon.
Yes, I was going to get to that, but go ahead and read it.
Oh, perfect. Oh, okay, great. It just says, when does the Electoral College cast their vote, and does that impact collection of mail-in ballots? So after the general election, and we're going to get really in the weeds here, but a governor prepared something called a certificate of ascertainment. And what it does is it lists all the individuals on the state slates for each candidate. The certificate also lists the number of votes each individual receives and shows which individuals were appointed as your state's electors. And then your state certificate of ascertainment is sent to something called NARA as part of the official records of the presidential election. I could keep going, but just know that there is an entire process there, and I'll let Anne attack the mail-in question.
Well, there's again, if you watched the debate last night, there's a clear difference of opinion about what the rules around mail-in ballots ought to be. And why is that such a big issue this year? Well, pretty simply, the reason it's a big issue is because a lot of folks who would normally vote in person due to COVID don't want to go in person, so they want to mail in the ballots. If you couple that with the fact that the Postal Service lost an awful lot of money because they're like the last mile of delivery for Amazon and UPS or Amazon, and so in many cases, and so they've lost a tremendous amount of revenue. So it's the perfect storm in terms of ballots getting received in time. There is disagreement about how long it should be, how long you should count ballots after. There are worries about ballots getting lost, thrown out, but that's actually nothing new. That's always been something people have worried about. But I feel like we have a pretty good system in this country to make sure that mail-in ballots are counted properly. It's not been something that has been necessarily problematic to any great extent in the past. So some of that is just, I think, angst on the part of the candidates, but it does present a problem given the Postal Service's lack of revenue, and right now in the pandemic, and the fact that so many more people are going to mail in their votes. So we're going to have that resolved.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. The end of it, we've got to have that resolved is exactly it. We had another question around WOSB, and well, actually it was some feedback, and it says that that they appreciate our efforts on the WOSB set-asides. However, the new rule by the SBA is causing issues as there are only third-party certifiers along with SBA, and it is causing delays. So now WOSBs can't compete for contracts until backlog clears. I actually would like to respond to this because Barb and I had a conversation about this ad nauseum. To be honest, there isn't at this particular time a backlog. They have everything in the system. So if you have applied through the SBA, all of those applications are in the system and they are processing them, meaning looking at the documentation, making certain that the documentation is all there. And then on October 15th, according to legislation, then they can actually start approving those particular applications. From a third-party certifier perspective, I know that all of the third-party certifiers are processing. Their processing time is a little bit shorter than the SBA. Barb said they are running right now at about 90 days. You know, as you know, WeBank is one of our strategic partners. They are running at around 45 to 60 days. There's actually going to be a roundtable tomorrow, a session on WOSB where you can just go into the room and ask questions. And so I implore you to go into the rooms and ask the questions around WOSB, but there are a couple of different avenues for you to obtain your certification and to do so that you are not precluded from participating in contracts and competing from that perspective. So I hope that answered the question for you, but certainly tomorrow, make certain that you join us for those roundtables. We will have a roundtable on GSA, on WOSB, as well as for our new members getting acclimated to the WIPP network. We have one for you for our community connections. Just looking for, I thought there was a last question and just want to make certain that we get that one done. Okay, I think that was it. Lizzie, did I miss one that you saw? I think I had them all that now.
No, I just saw that Teresa said that she likes the comment, Candace, that we will make our table and ask them to pull up, and that's exactly what we do.
That's our 20th anniversary. We've got to do what we have to do to make our voices heard and to continue to work on this great foundation that was already set, right? This has been a tough year and tough for everyone. And I think the big word that comes to me is disruption and innovation. And so sometimes you've got to disrupt the system. And if we have to disrupt it by building our own table and having people come to us, well, then doggone it, that's what we're going to do. But we're going to continue to make an impact for women-owned businesses in this country from a policy perspective. So thank you. And thank you both for all of your hard work. Before we go to our last slide and sort of summarize and culminate this discussion, are there any other points that you wanted to bring up before I really start talking about being engaged, right? Because that's sort of been the theme of this conversation that we've had as we talk around and about the education around this political process.
Well, I'm just going to say that, first of all, advocacy is not for the weak. If you have to build your own table, you build your own table. You're not necessarily in advocacy, you're not necessarily invited. You just have to decide to jump in. And so, you know, that's kind of just a general comment on the power of women. Don't sit around waiting for an engraved invitation, jump in. And what I mean by jump in is volunteer on campaigns. I mean, they always need volunteers. Consider supporting candidates with money, the people that have been doing what you need them to do. It means forwarding a letter from WIPP. I mean, I'm sorry, I guess I'm jumping into this next slide. I don't mean to do that, but I'm just saying advocacy takes a lot of different forms, and there's probably one that's right for you. You just have to figure it out. The second thing I wanted to just say about the WSB question is that is a perfect example of when you need advocacy, right? So if you think there is a delay, if there is something wrong with the system, right? That's the perfect thing that WIPP is good at tackling on behalf of all women business owners. Now, I heard you say that was not necessarily the case, but if it were to be the case, WIPP would jump in and try to make sure it was solved. It's not every business owner on their own having to figure it out or having to get in touch with the SBA. So there's just a lot of avenues for advocacy. There's a lot of room for supporting people that support you. We have a long history of doing that here at WIPP, and I just hope everybody will continue it.
Absolutely. I appreciate you bringing that up too. And again, for our members who have questions, who need to have assistance or want to provide us with feedback like what we just heard, please reach out to us. We can be reached through membership@wipp.org. That's membership@wipp.org. And that is your gateway. We will make certain that we put that that email address up for you before or as we do our closing later on today. But we are your business ecosystem for success, and we want to be here for you. You know, the other is, as Ann said, we want you to get engaged, right? So what does this mean to you, right? Meaning, what does this political process mean? What does it mean to be engaged? And it means meet, call, write, and of course, vote. As Ann brought up, volunteering. So first is make certain that you're engaging, right? In your WIPP membership, so that you are engaged in educational opportunities like this, so you can hear the latest and greatest news. When we have calls to action, because we are asked to provide our opinion on various topics. So we reach out to our membership because you are the front line and the businesses being affected, and we want to hear from you. We also, when there is an opportunity to testify in front of Congress, as Jeanette Pranger said earlier, when she talked about her opportunity that she had, we go to our WIPP membership. So please stay engaged with us. And you see here, I forgot it was on this slide, but the membership@wipp.org is right here. Please make certain that you reach out to us with questions, concerns, information that you may have, because we do share that back with the appropriate parties. And we take that information internally as we really look at what our strategic plan is for the following year, right now. That's what we're going into next week. What do we need to tackle? Where do we need to have a stance? Where do we need to use our voice? And so we will do that during that time. So please, please keep the information coming. The next is certainly support your candidates, right? So learn as much as you can about your women candidates on the local, regional, and federal levels. See who is supporting you. If in fact they are supporting you, you support them back. Ann just said that. How can we show support? Support them back, right? Make certain that you're letting them know something that they did that, worked for us. Let them know. We appreciate that. And by the way, this is the economic impact, positive economic impact that it's had on my business, on my employees, and ultimately on my community. So they can know what they're doing is actually working. And I think, Lizzie, you wanted to add to that part of the conversation?
Well, I was going to say, Jeanette just really embodies what we continually talk about, and many other members as well, of that getting to know your members of Congress directly impacts your business, and was directly impacted our ability to get things done for women-owned small businesses, because we're able to call on WIPP members like Jeanette, who know her members or know their district staff as well, who report back to their DC staff and say, we need you to go talk about how important this is to your business and to small businesses. And it really made a huge difference. So yes, getting to know them and then also getting to know their staff is incredibly important.
Absolutely. And I'm so happy you brought up the staff, because that was my next point, and getting to know them before you need them, not when you need them, right? Because when you need them, it's almost too late. So get to know them before you need them. And certainly be sure that you are engaging with their staff, with their scheduler, with their team, because each one of their team members are assigned a portfolio of business. Someone has women-owned business portfolio. Someone may have veterans, someone may have minority. Get to know the staff who is dealing with the portfolio that we fall into, which is women business issues, so that again, you can be that direct line to them as well as to the policymakers. Because a lot of times, once you speak to the policymaker, they're going to turn around to the staff who handles that and says, you know, here, carry out this particular task, if you will, and they're the ones that may call you back and follow up. And then that leads me to that. Follow up, follow up, follow up. It is statistically proven, not Candace stated, statistics. 85% of people do not follow up when they're asked to. And so I want us to be in that 15%. We want to follow up. We want to do so in earnest. We want to do so in a valuable and thoughtful way. So when you're asked again to participate in a call to action, you're asked to participate in a roundtable, you're asked to lend your information or knowledge, if you will, to a conversation, please take the opportunity to do that, because it matters at the end of the day. And last but certainly not least, as you are supporting your candidates, again, you know, meet, call, write, and vote. So call them, make them aware. Meredith talked about that earlier. Make the policymakers aware of what is important to you, as well as a lot of times what's important to WIPP. We have some calls to action. We had a few this year, even where we provided template letters so that you would have everything that you need to engage with your policymaker on the subject that we needed to engage with them on. And that happens for various points of our policy priorities. So make certain that you exercise your right to use your voice, make certain that you know the power of your voice, and please be sure to stay engaged with your policymakers and certainly with us as your front line to those policymakers. Ladies, would you like to add any final words as we end our amazing session? I love this political voter education, if you will, because I just think that being armed with the knowledge, it just makes us better equipped to do what we have to do. So any closing thoughts from either of you?
Well, I'm just going to say thank you to everybody who, over all these years that we've been with WIPP, I just want to say thank you to everybody who's given us feedback. Like, we can only, advocacy and your advocates are only as good as you help them, right? We're not on the ground. We don't know every single issue that a small business might end up, or a woman-owned business, not necessarily just small, is encountering with the federal government or with federal policy. We can't know everything. So we've really depended on hearing from WIPP members. And I just want to say thank you to everybody that has continued to give us feedback on what's bothering them, what they think needs to be changed, or who they support. That's tremendously helpful to a robust advocacy program.
I would just echo what Ann said, and also, you know, thank you, especially during these incredible times with COVID. That feedback has been just invaluable for us to be able to take back to members of Congress. So thank you, and thank you so much, Candace, for this session.
Absolutely. Thank you for today, all day. You have been with us, which has been amazing for our legislative day. So thank you, Ann and Lizzie, for indulging us in these important conversations today. And please, all of our attendees, please give Ann and Lizzie a virtual round of applause. Thank you. We appreciate you.